Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like, and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
I remember the day my daughter, Mia, was born like it was yesterday. It was supposed to be the best day of my life, the moment I became a dad, the moment everything in the world made sense. But instead, it was the day my world started crumbling piece by piece, and I didn't even know it yet. My wife, Jasmine, and I had been together for 5 years, married for 3. We met in college at one of those house parties where the music's too loud, and everyone's pretending they're cooler than they are. She was the life of the party, laughing and joking with everyone, her smile lighting up the whole damn room. Me? I was just a guy leaning against the wall, wondering why I'd even come. Somehow, she saw me through the crowd and decided I was worth her time. That night turned into a whirlwind romance, the kind you only see in movies. By the time we graduated, we were inseparable. Life after college wasn't easy. We both worked long hours, me at a construction company, her at a marketing firm, but we made it work. We scraped together enough for a down payment on a little house in the suburbs, the kind with a picket fence and a tiny backyard. It wasn't much, but it was ours. When Jasmine told me she was pregnant, I was over the moon. I grew up without a dad, and I swore to myself I'd be the kind of father I never had. We painted the nursery together, a soft yellow because we didn't know if it was a boy or a girl yet. We went to every doctor's appointment, every Lamaze class. I held her hand through it all, dreaming about the family we were building. The delivery room was chaos. Jasmine screamed, the doctors shouted instructions, and I stood there trying not to panic as she squeezed my hand like her life depended on it. And then, finally, Mia was here. I looked at her tiny face, her perfect little hands, and I felt something I'd never felt before. Love. Pure, unconditional love. But then I noticed something else. Mia didn't look like me. At first, I told myself I was being ridiculous. Babies come out all sorts of colors, right? I mean, she was light-skinned, sure, but Jasmine's light-skinned too. It didn't mean anything. But the doubt crept in, slow and steady, like a leak you don't notice until the whole damn floor is flooded. I didn't say anything to Jasmine. How could I? She'd just gone through hours of labor, and I wasn't about to ruin the moment with my paranoia. But I couldn't shake the feeling. Over the next few weeks, the doubts only grew. Every time someone came to visit, they'd comment on how beautiful Mia was. But then they'd glance at me, a flicker of confusion crossing their faces before they quickly looked away. She's got her mom's complexion, they'd say, their voices just a little too forced. And her mom's eyes, too. It was like they were trying to convince themselves as much as they were trying to convince me. One night, as Jasmine was feeding Mia, I finally brought it up. She's beautiful, isn't she? I said, my voice casual. She is, Jasmine said, smiling down at her. She doesn't look much like me, though, I said, keeping my tone light. Jasmine froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to notice. Then she laughed, but it sounded off like she was forcing it. Babies change a lot, she said. She'll probably take after you when she gets older. Her words didn't sit right. I tried to push the doubts away, to focus on being a good dad. But the more time passed, the harder it became. Mia wasn't just light-skinned, she was white. Her hair was straight, her eyes were blue, and there wasn't a single feature that connected her to me. I started noticing little things about Jasmine, too. The way she'd avoid eye contact when I talked about Mia's future. The way she'd get defensive whenever I mentioned genetics or family traits. Something wasn't adding up. One afternoon, while Jasmine was out running errands, I found myself staring at Mia as she slept in her crib. I'm going to find out the truth, I whispered, my voice shaking. I went online and started looking up paternity tests. It felt wrong, like I was betraying Jasmine, but I couldn't live with the doubt anymore. A week later, the results came in. When I opened the envelope, my hands were trembling so badly I almost ripped the paper. Probability of paternity, 0%. Those 3 words hit me like a freight train. My vision blurred, my chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Mia wasn't mine. I sat there in silence, staring at the paper, as the realization sank in. The woman I loved, the woman I'd built my life with, had cheated on me. And she hadn't just cheated, she'd lied. She let me believe Mia was mine. Let me fall in love with a child that wasn't even my blood. Anger bubbled up, hot and furious, but it was drowned out by the heartbreak. How could she do this to me? When Jasmine came home that night, I was waiting for her in the living room, the test results clutched in my hand. Mike, what's wrong? She asked, her smile fading as she saw my face. I didn't say anything. I just held out the paper. Her eyes flicked to the page, and I saw it. The moment she realized the jig was up. Mike, I can explain, she started, her voice trembling. Don't, I said, my voice cold. Don't you dare try to explain this away. She sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. It was a mistake, she whispered. A mistake? I snapped. A mistake is forgetting to take out the trash. This? This is betrayal. She started crying, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. What do you want me to say? She sobbed. I want the truth, I said. Who's her father? Jasmine sat there on the couch, her face buried in her hands, crying like she was the one who'd been betrayed. I stood there, clutching the paternity test results, my mind racing. I wanted to scream, to flip the coffee table, to do something, but all I could do was wait for her to speak. When she finally looked up at me, her face was streaked with tears. My guy! Who is he? I interrupted, my voice cold and sharp. She flinched, like the words had slapped her. It doesn't matter, she said weakly. It matters to me, I snapped. I've been raising this baby like she's mine. I deserve to know. Jasmine looked away, her hands twisting in her lap. It was just one time, she whispered. One time? I repeated, my voice rising. One time, and you managed to get pregnant? Do you have any idea how messed up this is? I know, she said, her voice breaking. I know I screwed up, but it didn't mean anything. I love you, Mike. I love our family. Our family? I barked out a bitter laugh. Mia's not even mine. How the hell is this a family? The room fell into a heavy silence, the kind that feels like it's pressing down on you, making it hard to breathe. Jasmine sat there, wiping at her tears, while I tried to wrap my head around everything. What's his name? I asked again, my voice quieter, but no less insistent. She hesitated, then finally said, Eric. Eric who? Eric Carter, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The name hit me like a slap in the face. Eric Carter, one of her co-workers. I'd met him a few times at office parties. Tall, good-looking, with that slick charm that always rubbed me the wrong way. I should have known, I muttered, shaking my head. It wasn't like that, Jasmine said quickly. It just had happened. I didn't mean for it to. Didn't mean for it to? I snapped. What? You just tripped and fell into his bed. That's not fair, she said, her voice trembling. Fair? I repeated, my voice rising again. You want to talk about fair? You cheated on me, lied to me. Let me believe Mia was mine. How the hell is any of that fair? Jasmine started crying again, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me, like my entire life was a lie. I need some air, I said, grabbing my keys and heading for the door. Mike, please don't go, Jasmine called after me. But I didn't stop. I drove aimlessly for hours, the paternity test sitting on the passenger seat like a bomb waiting to go off. My mind was a mess of emotions. Anger, sadness, betrayal, confusion. Part of me wanted to turn the car around and scream at Jasmine until I had nothing left. Another part of me just wanted to disappear, to pretend none of this was happening. Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner. I sat in the car for a while, staring out at the neon sign flickering in the window. Then, without really thinking, I grabbed the test and headed inside. The waitress greeted me with a tired smile and led me to a booth near the back. I ordered coffee, even though I didn't really want it, and sat there staring at the test results. Rough night, the waitress asked when she brought the coffee. You could say that, I muttered. She gave me a sympathetic look, but didn't push for details. I sat there for what felt like hours, nursing my coffee and trying to figure out what to do. What was I supposed to do? Pack up and leave? Try to forgive Jasmine? Could I even look at Mia again without feeling this overwhelming sense of loss? I thought about everything I'd done for that little girl. Rocking her to sleep when she was fussy, changing her diapers, singing her silly songs just to see her smile. None of that was fake. None of that was a lie. But it didn't change the fact that she wasn't mine. When I finally got home, the house was dark. Jasmine had left the living room light on, but the rest of the place was quiet. I found her in the nursery, sitting in the rocking chair with Mia in her arms. She looked up when I walked in, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed. I didn't know how to tell you, she said softly. Then you shouldn't have lied, I said. I was scared, she admitted. I didn't want to lose you. You didn't think sleeping with someone else might do the trick? I shot back. She flinched but didn't respond. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the two of them. Mia was asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling, her little hand clutching the edge of Jasmine's shirt. I need to know something, I said finally. Jasmine looked up at me, her eyes wary. What? If I hadn't figured it out, if I hadn't done the test, would you have ever told me? Her silence was all the answer I needed. That night, I slept on the couch. Not that I got much sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was Mia's face, her little smile, her bright blue eyes that looked nothing like mine. I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't. She was innocent in all this. None of this was her fault. But that didn't make it hurt any less. The next morning, Jasmine tried to talk to me again, but I wasn't ready. I spent most of the day in the garage, tinkering with a car I wasn't even planning to fix, just to keep my hands busy. When the sun started to set, I went back inside. Jasmine was in the kitchen, making dinner like everything was normal, like our entire lives hadn't just been blown apart. "We need to figure out what happens next," I said, leaning against the doorframe. She turned to face me, her eyes wide. "What do you mean? Do we try to fix this?" I asked. Or do we call it quits?" Her lips trembled, but she didn't answer. After the confrontation, the house felt like a war zone. Jasmine and I weren't yelling or throwing things. No, it was worse than that. It was the silence, the kind that creeps into every corner and makes it impossible to breathe. She tiptoed around me, trying to pretend things were normal, but nothing was normal anymore. Every time I looked at her, all I could think about was Eric. And every time I looked at Mia, my heart broke a little more. The only thing I knew for sure was that things couldn't keep going the way they were. That weekend, while Mia napped in the nursery, Jasmine sat down across from me at the dining table. "We need to talk," she said. I folded my arms, leaning back in the chair. "About what?" "About us," she said, her voice trembling. I didn't respond. "Mike, I know what I did was unforgivable," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "But I love you. I love our family. And I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." "Fix this?" I repeated, my voice bitter. "How do you fix something like this, Jasmine? You cheated. You lied. You let me believe Mia was mine. How do we come back from that?" She flinched but didn't back down. "I'll go to therapy. I'll quit my job. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't give up on us." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the anger and betrayal were too fresh, too raw. "I don't know if I can do this," I said finally. Jasmine's face crumpled, and she covered her mouth with her hand to stifle a sob. After she went to bed, I sat in the living room, staring at the paternity test results on the coffee table. I couldn't get the words out of my head. Probability of paternity, 0%. I thought about my own father, the man who'd walked out on me and my mom when I was just a baby. I'd spent my whole life promising myself I'd never be like him, that I'd be there for my family no matter what. But now, I was starting to understand why he left. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to a park on the other side of town. It was a quiet place, the kind where old men sat on benches feeding the ducks, and joggers made their rounds with headphones in their ears. I sat down on a bench near the lake and pulled out my phone. "Hey man," a familiar voice answered. It was my best friend, Tony. We'd known each other since middle school, back when we used to sneak into the corner store for candy we couldn't afford. "Hey," I said, my voice strained. "What's up?" he asked. "You sound like hell." "I need to talk," I said. "About what?" "About Jasmine," I said, my voice cracking. We met up at a diner a few hours later. Tony ordered a burger, but I couldn't eat. I just sat there, staring at the table, trying to find the right words. "What's going on, man?" Tony asked, leaning forward. "You're scaring me." I took a deep breath and told him everything. The paternity test, Eric, the lies. By the time I was done, Tony looked like he didn't know whether to punch something or hug me. "Damn, Mike," he said finally. "I don't even know what to say." "Yeah, me neither," I said, running a hand over my face. "You got to figure out what you want, man," he said. "Do you still love her?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I think I do, but every time I look at her, all I see is what she did." Tony nodded slowly. "And Mia?" I felt my chest tighten. "She's innocent in all this. None of it's her fault." "Exactly," Tony said. "So whatever you decide, don't let her pay the price for her mom's mistakes." That night, I sat in the nursery while Mia slept, her tiny hand clutching a stuffed bunny. She looked so peaceful, so perfect, and my heart ached with love and anger all at once. "I don't know what to do, kiddo," I whispered. "I want to be there for you, but I don't know if I can stay with your mom." Mia didn't respond, of course, but just saying the words out loud felt like a weight lifting off my chest. Over the next few weeks, Jasmine tried everything to win me back. She cooked my favorite meals, left little notes in my lunchbox, and even started going to therapy like she promised. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all too little, too late. One night, as we sat on opposite ends of the couch, I finally spoke up. "Jasmine, I need to ask you something," I said. "Anything," she said, her eyes wide. "If Eric hadn't been white, would you have told me the truth?" She froze, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She started, but then she stopped. That's what I thought, I said, my voice bitter. The weeks turned into months, and the distance between us only grew. We still lived in the same house, but it was like we were strangers passing each other in the hallway. The only thing keeping me there was Mia. I couldn't bring myself to leave her, even if staying meant living with a constant reminder of Jasmine's betrayal. But I knew I couldn't keep living like that forever. One afternoon, while Jasmine was at work, I packed a bag and called Tony. I need a place to crash for a while, I said. Say no more, he said. I left a note on the kitchen counter for Jasmine. It wasn't long or dramatic, just the truth. I can't do this anymore. I'll still be there for Mia, but I need some time to figure out what I want. And with that, I walked out the door. Leaving wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. When I packed that bag and walked out the door, I told myself I was doing the right thing. For me, for Mia, and maybe even for Jasmine. But the second I stepped into Tony's apartment, I felt the weight of what I'd just done. Tony lived in a two-bedroom place downtown, the kind that smelled faintly of old carpet and cheap air freshener. He cleaned up before I arrived, which was saying something considering he wasn't exactly Mr. Domestic. You can crash in the spare room, he said, gesturing toward a door down the hall. It's not much, but it's better than the couch. Thanks, I said, dropping my bag by the door. No problem, he said, clapping me on the shoulder. Your family, man. For the first few days, I kept to myself. I went to work, came back to Tony's, and spent most of my evenings staring at the walls, wondering what the hell I was supposed to do next. Tony tried to get me out of the house, inviting me to a bar, a basketball game, even a poker night with some of his buddies, but I wasn't in the mood for any of it. You can't just sit around moping all day, he said one evening as we sat in the living room, a basketball game playing on the TV. I'm not moping, I said, though I knew I was lying. Yeah, you are, he said, and I get it, man. You're going through it. But sitting here feeling sorry for yourself isn't going to fix anything. Meanwhile, Jasmine was blowing up my phone. She called every day, sometimes multiple times, and left voicemails that ranged from desperate to angry. Mike, please call me back, she said in one. I know I screwed up, but we need to talk about this. About us? Mike, this is ridiculous, she said in another. You can't just run away and leave me here to deal with everything. I listened to every message, but I didn't respond. I wasn't ready. The only person I couldn't avoid was Mia. I still saw her on weekends, picking her up from the house and bringing her back to Tony's apartment. She was too young to understand what was going on, but I could tell she sensed something was off. Where's Mommy? She asked one Saturday as we sat on the floor of Tony's living room, playing with blocks. She's at home, I said, trying to keep my tone casual. Why don't you live with us anymore? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. It's complicated, kiddo, I said. She frowned, her little face scrunching up in confusion. When are you coming home? I didn't have an answer. Seeing Mia every week was both a blessing and a curse. I loved spending time with her, but every moment we spent together reminded me of the life I'd left behind. One evening, after I dropped her off at the house, Jasmine came out to the car. Mike, we need to talk, she said, crossing her arms over her chest. I don't think that's a good idea, I said, starting to roll up the window. Please, she said, her voice softer now. Just give me 5 minutes. I reluctantly stepped out of the car, leaning against the door as she stood a few feet away. What do you want, Jasmine? I asked. I want to fix this, she said, her eyes pleading. I told you I need time, I said. It's been a month, she said. How much time do you need? As much as it takes, I said bluntly. She looked away, her jaw tightening. Do you even want to fix this? I don't know, I admitted. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she was going to cry. But instead, she straightened her shoulders and looked me in the eye. Well, figure it out, she said, her voice trembling. Because Mia deserves better than this. Her words stuck with me long after I drove away. She was right, Mia did deserve better. But I wasn't sure if that meant staying or leaving for good. Tony finally managed to drag me out of the house one Friday night, taking me to a bar a few blocks away. You need this, he said as we grabbed a table near the back. I don't know, man, I said, glancing around at the crowded room. You've been living like a hermit for weeks, he said. It's time to blow off some steam. The drinks helped. By the time I was on my second beer, I felt a little less like the weight of the world was crushing me. But then, as I glanced toward the bar, I saw someone I never expected to see. Eric. He was standing there, laughing with a couple of guys, a drink in his hand. He looked just as smug as I remembered, and seeing him there sent a surge of anger through me. Tony noticed the change in my expression. What's wrong? It's him, I said, nodding toward the bar. Tony followed my gaze, his brow furrowing. That's the guy. I nodded. Without another word, Tony stood up and started walking toward him. Tony, don't, I said, but he ignored me. What happened next was a blur. Tony confronted Eric, words were exchanged, and before I knew it, punches were thrown. The bouncer broke it up before things got too out of hand, but not before Eric landed a hit on Tony's jaw. As we were escorted out of the bar, Tony grinned, blood trickling from his lip. That felt good, he said. You're an idiot, I muttered, but I couldn't help but smile. That night, as I lay awake in Tony's spare room, I thought about Eric and everything he represented. He'd taken something from me, my trust, my family, my sense of security, and I wasn't sure if I could ever get it back. But one thing was clear, I couldn't keep living in limbo. After that night at the bar, something shifted inside me. Seeing Eric, hearing his smug laughter, watching him walk around without a care in the world, it lit a fire in me I hadn't felt in weeks. For too long, I'd been stuck in limbo, not knowing what I wanted or what to do next. But now I realized that staying in this halfway life wasn't an option. I needed answers. I needed closure. And most of all, I needed to decide if there was any chance of rebuilding the life Jasmine and I had broken. The next morning, I called Jasmine. We need to talk, I said when she answered. Her voice was wary. Okay, about what? About everything, I said. Can you meet me somewhere? Without me, She hesitated. Yeah, I could do that. When? Today, I said. The sooner, the better. We met at a park on the edge of town, the same park where I'd taken Mia when she first started walking. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jasmine was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench near the playground. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept much since I left. Thanks for coming, I said as I sat down beside her. She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself like she was trying to shield against the cold. What's this about, Mike? I need the truth, I said. All of it, for the next hour. She told me everything. She and Eric had hooked up during an office retreat about a year before Mia was born. It was a drunken mistake, she claimed, something she regretted the second it happened. But when she found out she was pregnant, she didn't know if the baby was mine or his. I thought about telling you, she said, her voice trembling. But I was scared. I didn't want to lose you. So you lied, I said flatly. She nodded. I thought if I just ignored it, it wouldn't matter. You'd love me and no matter what. And we could move on. I let out a bitter laugh. Move on? You thought I wouldn't notice that she looks nothing like me? She flinched. I know it was wrong, Mike. I know I should have told you the truth. But you didn't, I said. And now here we are. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The sound of kids playing on the swings filled the silence, a cruel reminder of the life we used to have. What do you want me to do? Jasmine asked finally. I don't know, I said honestly. But I can't keep living like this. The lies, the betrayal. It's too much. I'll do whatever it takes, she said, her voice breaking. I'll quit my job. I'll cut Eric out of my life completely. Don't, I interrupted. This isn't about what you can promise. It's about what you already did. When I got back to Tony's apartment that evening, I felt more lost than ever. Jasmine's confession had answered some questions, but it hadn't made the decision any easier. What's the plan? Tony asked as we sat in the living room, a basketball game playing in the background. I don't know, I admitted. I don't know if I can forgive her. Tony nodded. You don't have to, you know. Sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away. But what about Mia? I asked. She's innocent in all this. She didn't ask for any of this. Then be there for her, Tony said. Be the dad she deserves. But that doesn't mean you have to stay with Jasmine. The next few weeks were some of the hardest of my life. Jasmine and I talked occasionally, mostly about Mia, but the conversations were tense and awkward. I started seeing a therapist, someone Tony recommended, and for the first time, I began to unpack the anger and hurt I'd been carrying. You have a lot of grief, the therapist said during one session. Grief? I asked, frowning. Yes, she said. You've lost the life you thought you had, the trust you had in your wife, the certainty about your daughter. That kind of loss doesn't just go away. It takes time to process. I didn't know how to respond, but her words stuck with me. One evening, as I sat on the couch flipping through old photos, I found a picture of Mia from the day she was born. She was so tiny, so perfect, and the love I'd felt for her in that moment was as real as anything I'd ever experienced. She's still your daughter, I whispered to myself. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. The next day, I called Jasmine and asked her to meet me at the park again. When she arrived, she looked nervous, her hands twisting together in her lap. What's going on? She asked. I've made a decision, I said. Her eyes widened. About us? I nodded. I can't do this anymore, Jasmine. I can't stay in this marriage. The trust is gone, and I don't think it's something we can get back. Her face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mike, please. Don't do this. I have to, I said, my voice firm. But that doesn't mean I'm walking away from Mia. She's still my daughter, no matter what the test says. I'll be there for her every step of the way. The divorce was messy, as divorces often are. There were fights over custody, over money, over things that shouldn't have mattered but somehow did. In the end, we agreed to joint custody of Mia. She would spend weekdays with Jasmine and weekends with me. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best we could do. The day the divorce was finalized, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Signing those papers felt like closing the door on everything Jasmine and I had built. The love, the memories, the family we tried to create. But it also felt like a fresh start, a chance to rebuild my life on my own terms. Mia was the one constant through it all. Every time I saw her, every time she laughed or reached for my hand, I felt like I had a purpose again. She wasn't my biological daughter, but none of that mattered. She was mine in every way that counted. The first weekend after the custody arrangement began, I picked Mia up from Jasmine's house. It was the first time I'd seen her since the divorce was finalized, and the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Everything she needs is in the bag, Jasmine said, handing me Mia's overnight bag without meeting my eyes. Got it, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Bye, Mommy, Mia said, waving as I strapped her into her car seat. Jasmine forced a smile, her eyes glistening with tears. Bye, baby. Have fun with Daddy. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror at Mia's smiling face. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Being a single dad wasn't easy. The first few weekends were a learning curve, filled with late-night diaper changes, picky eating battles, and more than one meltdown from both of us. But we found our rhythm. Saturday mornings became our special time. We'd go to the park, where Mia loved to feed the ducks, or we'd stop by the farmer's market to pick out fresh fruit. Sunday afternoons were for baking cookies and watching cartoons, even if it meant my tiny apartment ended up covered in flour and chocolate chips. Those moments reminded me why I'd fought so hard to stay in her life. One afternoon, as Mia and I sat on the couch reading a picture book, she looked up at me with those big blue eyes and asked a question that caught me off guard. Daddy, why don't you live with Mommy anymore? I froze, my mind scrambling for an answer. Well, sweetheart, sometimes mommies and daddies decide they're better off living in different houses. Why? She asked, her little brow furrowed. Because it helps them be better parents, I said carefully. But no matter where I live, I'll always love you. She seemed to accept that, snuggling closer to me as I turned the page. Jasmine and I did our best to stay civil for Mia's sake. We didn't talk much outside of drop-offs and pickups, but when we did, it was always about Mia, her milestones, her favorite foods, the funny things she said and did. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. One evening, as I sat in my apartment scrolling through old photos, I came across a picture of me and Jasmine from the early days of our relationship. We were sitting on the hood of my beat-up old car, laughing at something I couldn't remember. Looking at that photo, I felt a pang of sadness. We'd been happy once, truly happy. But life had a way of throwing curveballs, and not every story gets a happy ending. Over time, things started to get easier. The anger I felt toward Jasmine began to fade, replaced by a quiet acceptance. I still didn't trust her, and I doubted I ever would, but I stopped letting her choices consume me. Mia was my focus now. A year after the divorce, I was at the park with Mia when a woman approached us. She had a little boy around Mia's age, and they were instantly drawn to each other, laughing and chasing each other around the playground. Your daughter's adorable, the woman said, smiling warmly. Thanks, I said, smiling back. She's my whole world. We started talking, and I learned her name was Lisa. She was a single mom, new to the area, and just trying to make things work like I was. By the time Mia and her son were tired out, Lisa and I had exchanged numbers. Over the next few months, Lisa and I started seeing each other more often, at the park, at the library, even at each other's houses for playdates. She was kind, funny, and understood the challenges of being a single parent. It wasn't long before our friendship turned into something more. When I finally introduced Lisa to Jasmine, I wasn't sure what to expect. Jasmine was polite but distant, her smile tight as she shook Lisa's hand. I'm glad Mia has people who care about her, Jasmine said, her voice neutral. So am I said, meeting her gaze. By the time Mia started preschool, Lisa and I had built a life together. A messy, beautiful, chaotic life that reminded me every day of what I had to be grateful for. Mia still spent time with Jasmine, and I made sure she knew she was loved by both of us. But my relationship with Jasmine remained a closed chapter, one that I didn't regret ending. Life wasn't perfect. There were still challenges, still moments when the weight of the past threatened to drag me down. But every time Mia ran into my arms or called me daddy, I knew I'd made the right choice. Because in the end, being a father isn't about biology. It's about showing up every single day, no matter what. And for Mia, I'd show up every time.